Success is often described as a finish line, a moment where the noise stops and fulfillment begins. But for someone like Elon Musk, success was never a destination, it was a direction. A relentless forward pull that began long before money, fame, or validation entered the picture, rooted instead in a restless dissatisfaction with ordinary limits and a belief that life had to be about more than survival or comfort, because from a young age he understood something most people don't realize until much later, that ease is not meaning, and applause is not purpose. And so the climb began not with certainty, but with obsession, the kind that keeps you awake at night, asking questions no one around you seems interested in answering, questions about energy, about humanity's future, about whether existence itself has a point beyond repetition. And this mindset shaped the way he approached success, not as something to enjoy, but as something to endure, because every step upward required sacrificing something invisible but essential, whether it was time, relationships, peace, or the simple joy of being present without thinking. 10 moves ahead. And at first the sacrifices didn't feel like losses at all, they felt like necessary payments, because when you are climbing, the view below still motivates you more than the view ahead intimidates you, and early success feels intoxicating. It feels like confirmation that the pain is working, that sleepless nights and constant pressure are signs of progress, not warnings. And when the first companies survived, when money arrived, when people started paying attention, it created a dangerous illusion that meaning increases in direct proportion to achievement, that the higher you go, the more complete you'll feel. And this illusion is powerful because it's reinforced by the world around you, by headlines that celebrate numbers, not nuance, by praise that confuses impact with inner peace, and by a culture that treats exhaustion as a badge of honor rather than a symptom. So the climb accelerates, and with it, the expectations, because once you succeed once, success no longer feels optional, it feels required. And the fear of falling becomes stronger than the joy of rising, and that's when the climb subtly changes from a pursuit of purpose into a defense against failure, because now you are no longer trying to prove what's possible, you are trying to justify everything you've already sacrificed. And every step higher raises the stakes, because turning back would mean confronting the cost. And so you keep going, convincing yourself that fulfillment is just one breakthrough away, one more company, one more milestone, one more impossible goal. But what no one tells you is that the higher you climb, the thinner the air becomes, not just metaphorically but emotionally, because fewer people can relate to your reality, fewer people challenge you honestly, fewer people see you as a person instead of a symbol, and isolation begins quietly, disguised as focus, and solitude is mistaken for strength. And the very traits that helped you climb, detachment, intensity, relentless self-pressure, start to erode the parts of you that once felt human, because success demands efficiency, and efficiency has no patience for vulnerability. And when you're responsible for thousands of lives, billions of dollars, ideas that could shape the future of humanity, there's no room for doubt, or at least that's what you tell yourself. And so doubt gets buried, not resolved, and emotions are postponed indefinitely, because there's always something more urgent, another launch, another crisis, another decision that can't wait. And during this phase, the world sees only the momentum, the innovation, the headlines, the myth being built in real time. But inside the climber, something else is happening, something quieter and more unsettling, because the further you get from the starting point, the harder it becomes to remember why you started in the first place, and purpose begins to blur with pressure, and ambition begins to masquerade as obligation. And when success becomes your identity, failure becomes existential, because if you stop climbing, you're forced to ask who you are without the ascent. And that question is terrifying when you've spent your entire life outrunning it. And yet the climb continues, because stopping feels like weakness, and slowing down feels like betrayal, not just of others, but of the younger version of yourself. Who believed that greatness would finally bring peace, and so you push forward, ignoring the subtle signs that the climb is changing you, that joy is becoming transactional, that rest feels like guilt, that silence feels uncomfortable because it gives your thoughts too much room. And this is where success begins to hollow out, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, Because when every achievement is immediately followed by the next problem, satisfaction has no time to settle. And when the goalposts keep moving, fulfillment becomes theoretical rather than real, and the irony is that from the outside, this is the phase everyone envies, the phase they point to and say that's what winning looks like, without realizing that winning, when prolonged and unexamined, can feel like running on a treadmill that never stops, because the climb never asks whether you're happy, only whether you're capable, and capability is rewarded, even when it costs you yourself, and by the time you approach the top, you've invested so much into the climb that questioning it feels like heresy, because admitting that success feels different than promised would mean acknowledging that the map everyone follows might be wrong. And so instead of asking whether the climb leads to fulfillment, you tell yourself that fulfillment must be redefined, postponed, or sacrificed for something bigger, something abstract like legacy, or progress, or survival of the species. And while these ideas are noble and necessary, they can also become shields, protecting you from confronting the emptiness forming beneath the accomplishments, because the truth is that success doesn't automatically bring meaning, it amplifies whatever is already inside you. And if what's inside is unresolved, unbalanced, or neglected, success will magnify that too. And this is the quiet truth of the climb, that it doesn't just elevate you above others, it distances you from yourself. And unless you're willing to stop and look inward, the very thing you chase to feel whole can become the reason you feel incomplete. And yet at this stage, the climber doesn't know that yet, because the top still glows in the distance. And the belief remains that once you reach it, everything will finally make sense. Reaching the top is supposed to be the moment where everything finally slows down, where the weight lifts and the sacrifices make sense. But for someone like Elon Musk, peak doesn't arrive with silence or satisfaction, it arrives with noise, responsibility, and a strange emotional dissonance that no one prepares you for, because when you stand at the highest point, you don't just see how far you've come, you also see how far you can still fall. And that awareness changes everything, because success at a peak doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like maintenance, like holding something fragile together under immense pressure, where every mistake is magnified and every decision carries consequences that ripple far beyond your own life. And instead of freedom, you inherit obligation, because at the top, you are no longer chasing opportunity. You are guarding it. And guarding something valuable requires constant vigilance, which leaves little room for joy. And this is where the illusion of success fully unravels, because the fantasy promised peace, but the reality delivers responsibility without relief. And the applause that once felt energizing now feels distant, even irrelevant, because praise doesn't solve problems, and admiration doesn't ease the loneliness of leadership. And loneliness becomes unavoidable at the peak, not because people disappear, but because connection changes, because fewer people speak honestly, fewer people challenge you without fear, and fewer people see you as a human being rather than a symbol. And this creates a subtle isolation that isn't about being alone physically, but about being unseen emotionally, because when you become an icon of success, your struggles are either dismissed or mythologized, never simply understood. And vulnerability starts to feel risky, because the higher you are, the more your weaknesses can be used against you. So you learn to armor yourself, to communicate through logic and intensity rather than emotion. And while this armor protects the mission, it slowly suffocates the person inside it. And this is the paradox of the peak. The same discipline that built everything now prevents you from enjoying it, because there is always a north. Our crisis, another launch, another expectation, and success becomes a moving target you must constantly hit to justify your position. Because at the top, stagnation is treated as failure, and rest is mistaken for complacency. And so even when you have everything you once dreamed of, you live in a state of perpetual urgency, because the systems you've built depend on your momentum, and momentum has no off switch. And this is where emptiness begins to show itself more clearly, because when every day is filled with decisions that affect millions, it's easy to lose touch with the small, grounding experiences that make life feel real, like unstructured time, genuine laughter, or relationships that exist without an agenda. And these things don't disappear suddenly. They just get crowded out by priorities that feel more important until one day you realize that the life you built is impressive, emotionally narrow, optimized for output rather than fulfillment. And this realization doesn't come with a dramatic breakdown. It comes in quiet moments between meetings late at night, when the world finally stops asking for something from you. You're left alone with your thoughts. And in those moments, the question surfaces, was this supposed to feel different? And that question is dangerous because it threatens the entire narrative that success guarantees happiness. And for someone at the peak, that narrative feels like betrayal, not just of society's expectations, but the sacrifices made along the way, because if success doesn't bring fulfillment, then what was all the suffering for? And this creates a psychological trap where you double down on the very things that are hollowing you out, because admitting emptiness would mean admitting that something essential was missed. And so instead of slowing down, you speed up. Instead of reflecting, you expand. Instead of addressing the void, you distract yourself with bigger goals, because scale is a powerful anesthetic, and this is why the peak often feels more exhausting than the climb, because during the climb, hope fuels you, but at the peak, expectation drains you, and the pressure to live up to the myth becomes relentless, because now you're not just responsible for results, you're responsible for the idea of success itself, and any sign of doubt or dissatisfaction is interpreted as weakness or ingratitude. And so you learn to perform confidence even when you feel uncertain, and strength even when you feel depleted, and over time, this performance creates a split between who you are and who you're expected to be, and living in that split is where emptiness thrives, because authenticity requires safety, and safety is rare at the top, and even relationships change, because when power and success enter the room, they distort dynamics, making it harder to trust intentions, harder to feel loved for who you are rather than what you represent. And this erodes intimacy, because intimacy requires equality, and at the peak, equality is rare. And so, despite being surrounded by people, you feel alone in a way that's difficult to articulate, because loneliness at the top does look like isolation. It looks like constant interaction without genuine connection. And this is why success can feel emptier the higher you go, because the rewards become abstract while the costs become deeply personal. And the peak reveals a truth that no one talks about, that achievement can solve problems, but it cannot answer existential questions, and no amount of influence or wealth can replace meaning that comes from presence, balance, and connection. And for someone like Elon Musk, whose mission is tied to humanity's future, this emptiness is even more complex, because the work is undeniably important, and that importance makes it harder to step back and ask whether the personal cost is sustainable, because when the mission feels bigger than you, your needs feel insignificant by comparison. And yet ignoring those needs doesn't make them disappear, it just pushes them deeper, where they quietly shape your emotional state. And this is the moment where the peak stops feeling like an achievement and starts feeling like a question, because standing at the top forces you to confront the possibility that success, as it's traditionally defined, might be incomplete. And that realization, more than any failure, is what truly unsettles those who reach the highest heights. Because it suggests that the emptiness isn't a temporary phase, it's a signal pointing towards something that success alone cannot provide. At some point, when the noise fades just enough and the momentum pauses for a breath, the reckoning arrives not as a dramatic collapse, but as a quiet, unavoidable realization that success, no matter how vast or historic, cannot answer the most human question. And for someone like Elon Musk, this reckoning isn't about regret for the climb or denial of the impact, but about confronting the emotional math that was never fully calculated along the way. The realization that building the future of humanity does not automatically heal the present of the self, and that progress at scale does not exempt anyone from the need for meaning, connection, and inner coherence. And this moment is unsettling, because it forces a redefinition of what success actually is, stripping it of its glamour and exposing it as a tool rather than a destination. Because when you've reached the top and felt the emptiness, you're left with two choices: keep running from it by expanding outward, or turn inward and face what was postponed This inward turn is the hardest part, because it requires vulnerability in a world that rewarded invincibility, and honesty in a narrative built on certainty, and slowing down in a system designed for acceleration. And this is where many high achievers struggle, because the skills that create external success are not the same skills that create internal peace, and the discipline that drives innovation often suppresses reflection, and yet without reflection, success remains hollow, because meaning isn't found in scale, it's found in alignment. And alignment requires asking uncomfortable questions, like who am I without the mission? What do I value beyond outcomes? And am I living in a way that allows space for joy, grief, rest, and connection? And these questions don't have quick answers, which makes them frustrating for minds trained to optimize and solve. But they are necessary, because the emptiness at the top isn't a failure, it's feedback, a signal that something essential has been neglected. And when understood this way, emptiness becomes an invitation rather than a verdict, inviting a shift from achievement as identity to achievement as expression, where work serves life rather than consume it. And this shift doesn't mean abandoning ambition or diminishing impact. It means humanizing, grounding it in values that extend beyond productivity. And for someone whose vision spans planets and centuries, this grounding is what prevents burnout, cynicism, and emotional isolation. Because no mission, no matter how grand, is sustainable if it requires the complete erasure of the self. And the reckoning also reframes legacy, because legacy isn't just what you build, it's how you build it and who you become in the process. And history remembers achievements, but life is lived in moments, in relationships, in the quiet spaces between milestones. And when those spaces are empty, success feels cold and distant. And this is why the final stage of success isn't accumulation, it's integration. Learning how to hold ambition and humanity at the same time, how to pursue progress without sacrificing presence, and how to allow yourself to be more than what you produce. And this integration is deeply personal, because it looks different for everyone, but it always involves reconnecting with what was deprioritized during the climb, whether that's relationships, creativity without pressure, or simply the ability to sit still without feeling unproductive. And this reconnection doesn't erase the emptiness overnight, but it softens it, transforming it from a void into a space where something new can grow. And perhaps the most important realization in this reckoning is that fulfillment is found at the top or the bottom, but in the balance between striving and being, between building the future and living in the present. And this balance is rarely celebrated because it doesn't make headlines, but it's what makes success sustainable. And when this balance is acknowledged, success stops feeling like a burden to carry alone and starts feeling like a responsibility shared with life itself. And this is the quiet wisdom that emerges after the climb and the peak. The understanding that the goal was never to arrive at the top and stay there, but to learn from the journey and redefine what winning actually means, not as dominance or accumulation, but as a life that feels whole, even in the presence of uncertainty. And in this sense, the emptiness at the top is not the end of the story, it's the turning point. The moment where success stops being about proving something to the world and starts being about coming home to yourself, because in the end, the most meaningful achievement isn't building something that lasts forever, but building a life that feels worth living while you're here.